Okay, let's dive right in. Today, we're tackling one of the most critical and honestly, one of the most confusing areas of U.S. immigration law, unlawful presence. This isn't just a technicality. It's a topic that can literally shape someone's future for years or even a lifetime. So understanding how it works is absolutely essential.
What actually happens when your authorized stay ends? Because the moment it does, a clock can start ticking. And that clock has some major implications for anyone who hopes to one day legally stay in or return to the United States. Think of it in three main parts. First up, the rules. We'll define exactly what unlawful presence is. Then, we'll get into the penalties, the serious inadmissibility bars that get triggered. And finally, we'll look at the pathways, exploring who's exempt and how someone might be able to overcome these bars.
First things first, you can't really get your head around the consequences until you're crystal clear on what we're even talking about. So what is unlawful presence, according to the law?
The first is being in the U.S. without ever getting official permission to enter. The second is staying past the date you were explicitly told you had to leave. That's it. Both of those situations start the clock on unlawful presence.
Okay, so when does that clock actually start ticking? Well, if someone enters without being inspected, it starts right away, on day one. But for people who come in legally, it's usually all tied to their Form I-94, that official arrival/departure record. The clock starts the day after the date on that form expires. And for others, like students who are admitted for the duration of status, it kicks in the day after their program officially wraps up.
All right, now we get to the really serious part, the so what of all this. See, racking up unlawful presence isn't just a small slip-up. It triggers these very specific, very real penalties called inadmissibility bars. And these are the things that can slam the doors shut on re-entering the U.S. If you have more than 180 days of unlawful presence, and then you leave the country, bam, you're looking at a 3-year bar. If that time stretches to 1 full year before you leave, it jumps to a 10-year bar. And then there's the big one, the permanent bar. That's triggered if you have over a year of unlawful presence, you leave, and then you try to come back without permission. It's permanent.
And I really want to stress this. These are not just suggestions or guidelines. No. These are written into law. They are legally binding. Once you trigger one of these bars, it creates a huge legal wall that you have to somehow try and get over to get a visa or any other immigration benefit.
The good news is, it's not the whole story. The law does recognize that some people and some situations are different, and it carves out some really important exceptions to these rules. So who gets a pass on this? Well, the law's pretty specific. For starters, if you're under the age of 18, that time doesn't count against you as unlawful presence. The clock also pauses for someone who has a legitimate pending asylum application. There are also protections for folks in the Family Unity Program, and, this is so important, for vulnerable individuals, like victims of domestic abuse under VAWA and victims of severe trafficking. The law recognizes they're in a totally different situation.
Okay, but here's a really crucial detail you cannot miss. All those exemptions we just talked about, they're like a shield against the 3- and 10-year bars. But, and this is a big but, they do not protect you from the permanent bar. That one is triggered by an unlawful reentry, and it plays by a different set of rules. This is a super important piece of the puzzle.
So that brings us to our last big topic today. What if a bar does apply to someone? Is it just game over? Well, not always. There are specific legal tools you can use to try and overcome it.
They usually come in the form of what's called a waiver. And a waiver is basically you asking the government to forgive that ground of inadmissibility so you can move forward with your case.
Now, for the toughest one of all, that permanent bar, there is a path, but man, it is a long one. First, a person has to stay physically outside the U.S. for 10 full years, a whole decade. Only after that time has passed can they even begin the process of asking for special permission, known as consent to reapply, and they have to do it from outside the country. These are the actual forms, the tools you'd use. You've got the I-601 and the I-601A, which are the main waivers for unlawful presence. The big difference? The I-601A is huge because it lets certain people apply for the waiver before they even leave the U.S., which can cut down on how long families are separated. Then there's the I-212. That's the specific permission to reapply form we just talked about. Seeing the form numbers kind of makes it all feel a bit more real, doesn't it?
The law isn't static.
It changes, and sometimes a big court case can change everything. This quote here is from a really famous case, matter of Arabelli and Yarabelli. And what it did was create a major precedent around a specific kind of travel document.
So what does that actually mean for people? Well, there's this thing called advanced parole. It's like a permission slip to travel abroad and come back. That court case decided that if you leave and return using that specific document, your departure doesn't trigger the 3 or 10-year inadmissibility bars. That is a massive deal, especially for people in the middle of adjusting their status.
So at the end of the day, getting through this complex area of law really comes down to the 3 things we've walked through. You have to understand the rules, you have to know the penalties, and you have to be aware of the very specific exemptions and pathways for relief that might be out there.
What we've gone over here is for your information, but it is absolutely not legal advice. Every single case is different, every situation is unique. If any of this sounds like it applies to you, please, the most important thing you can do is talk to an authorized immigration attorney or legal service provider.
So we'll leave you with this final thought. The rules we've talked about today are already complex, and they're always changing because of new legislation or new court decisions. How can people best navigate it all to ensure they can build a secure future?